My girlfriend whispered, "I fake it every time," during what should have been an intimate moment, so I thanked her for the feedback, mastered the art elsewhere, and left reviews on her pillow from my new partner. Her jealous rants afterward were immediately muted. I thought Lauren and I had built something real over 3 years together, but apparently I was the only one who believed that. The confession came on a Tuesday night in February, right after what I'd foolishly thought was a particularly connected moment between us. I was lying there feeling closer to her than I had in months, running my fingers through her hair, when she turned to me with this cold, almost clinical expression and whispered those 6 words that would change everything: "I fake it every time, Jason." The casual way she said it, like she was commenting on the weather, hit me harder than any shouting match ever could. I felt my entire understanding of our relationship crumble in real time, but instead of getting angry or defensive, I surprised both of us by taking a deep breath and responding calmly. "Thank you for being honest with me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "That must have been difficult to say. Maybe we can work together to improve things, figure out what you actually enjoy, what makes you feel good." She looked at me like I'd suggested we take up competitive unicycling or something equally ridiculous. "Jason, I'm just not that kind of person," she said, already reaching for her phone to scroll through Instagram. "Physical stuff isn't really important to me anyway. I don't know why guys make such a big deal about it." The dismissiveness in her voice was what really got to me, not just the admission of deception, but the complete lack of interest in addressing it or even acknowledging that it might matter to our relationship. I realized in that moment that this wasn't just about physical intimacy. It was about her fundamental disrespect for me as a partner and her unwillingness to invest in what we were supposedly building together. She'd been going through the motions for who knows how long, treating our most intimate moments like a chore she had to endure rather than something we shared. "So you've been pretending for how long exactly?" I asked, genuinely curious about the scope of her deception. "Does it matter?" she replied without looking up from her screen. "It's not like anything's going to change. This is just how I am, and you'll have to deal with it if you want to stay with me." The casual cruelty of that statement, the implication that I should be grateful for her indifference, crystallized something important for me. I wasn't angry anymore, I was done. But instead of having a dramatic confrontation or giving her the emotional reaction she probably expected, I decided to handle this with the same calculated indifference she'd shown me. "I understand," I said simply. "Thanks for letting me know where we stand." Over the next few days, I began quietly planning my exit strategy while maintaining a completely normal exterior. Lauren seemed relieved that I wasn't making a big deal about her confession, probably thinking she'd successfully managed to lower my expectations permanently. She had no idea that her brutal honesty had actually freed me to start planning for something infinitely better. Over the following weeks, I methodically began distancing myself emotionally while Lauren remained completely oblivious to the fundamental shift happening in our relationship dynamic. I started spending significantly more time at the local community center where I'd been volunteering for the past year, teaching woodworking classes to teenagers and adults who genuinely appreciated learning something new. The contrast between their enthusiasm and Lauren's indifference became more apparent each day. These students actually cared about improving, asked thoughtful questions, and showed real gratitude for the time I invested in helping them develop their skills. I found myself staying later after classes, helping organize tools, planning more complex projects, anything to avoid going home to someone who treated our relationship like an obligation she was stuck fulfilling. Lauren barely noticed my increased absence, which told me everything I needed to know about how much she valued my presence anyway. Working late again? She'd ask absently when I came home at 9 instead of 6, not bothering to look up from whatever reality show was capturing her attention. The community center needed extra help with their spring fundraiser, I'd explain, which was technically true even though I'd volunteered for every committee I could find just to have legitimate reasons to stay away. She'd nod and go back to her phone, clearly relieved that I wasn't expecting her to engage in actual conversation or show interest in my day. I opened a separate savings account at a different bank and began quietly moving money there each week, money that would have normally gone toward our shared expenses like dinners out or weekend trips that she'd stopped appreciating anyway. I also started systematically moving my belongings to a storage unit across town, taking a few items each week so gradually that Lauren never noticed the apartment getting emptier. My books disappeared first, then my tools, my winter clothes, anything that was purely mine and wouldn't be missed immediately. I told myself I was just organizing better, getting rid of clutter, but really I was preparing for a clean break when the time came. "Did you move my coffee maker?" Lauren asked one morning, standing confused in the kitchen. "That was mine actually," I replied calmly. "I took it to the community center for the volunteer break room. I can get you a new one if you want." She looked annoyed for about 30 seconds before shrugging and making instant coffee instead, which perfectly summarized her level of investment in our shared life. During this time, I used my evening hours at the community center to really think about what I wanted in a partnership, what I'd been missing, what I deserved from someone who claimed to love me. I realized that Lauren's confession had revealed something much deeper than sexual incompatibility. It showed a complete lack of respect for me as a person, a willingness to deceive me rather than communicate, and an assumption that I'd accept whatever scraps of affection she decided to throw my way. I deserved someone who was excited to be with me, who wanted to build something real together, who saw intimacy as a connection to cherish rather than a chore to endure. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that Lauren had done me a massive favor by being honest about her deception, even if that wasn't her intention. At the community center, I met Sophie during my third week of extended volunteer hours, and she immediately changed my entire perspective on what genuine human connection could look like. She was a passionate art therapist who ran painting classes for seniors every Wednesday evening, and I first noticed her trying to carry about 15 canvases, a box of brushes, and 2 gallons of paint all at once while fumbling with her keys. "Need a hand?" I offered, catching a canvas before it hit the ground. "You're a lifesaver," she laughed, her whole face lighting up in a way that reminded me what real enthusiasm looked like. I always think I can carry more than physics actually allows. There was something immediately warm and authentic about Sophie that drew me in, the way she remembered every senior citizen's name and their preferred painting subjects, how she'd spend an extra hour helping someone who was struggling with their brush technique, the genuine joy she radiated when talking about helping people express themselves through art. Our friendship developed naturally through shared volunteer work, late-night conversations over coffee in the center's break room, and a mutual appreciation for actually making a difference in people's lives. "You know what I love about teaching woodworking?" I found myself telling her one evening as we cleaned up after our respective classes. "It's watching someone realize they can create something beautiful with their own hands, that they're capable of more than they thought." Sophie nodded enthusiastically, stacking paint-covered palettes in the sink. "That's exactly how I feel about art therapy." Last week, Mrs. Henderson painted her first landscape and started crying because she'd never thought she was creative enough to make something that pretty. These conversations were unlike anything I'd experienced with Lauren in years. Sophie actually listened, asked follow-up questions, shared her own insights and experiences. We could talk for hours about everything from our volunteer work to childhood memories to philosophical questions about what made life meaningful. I found myself genuinely excited about these interactions, looking forward to Wednesday evenings not just as an escape from my deteriorating relationship, but as a highlight of my week. "Your girlfriend must love that you volunteer so much," Sophie mentioned casually one evening as we walked to our cars. "Actually, she doesn't really care one way or the other," I replied, the honesty surprising even me. "We're not exactly on the same wavelength about most things these days." Sophie gave me a thoughtful look but didn't push for details, which I appreciated. She had this way of being supportive without being intrusive, caring without being overwhelming. The contrast between Sophie's emotional intelligence and Lauren's complete lack of interest in my inner life became more stark each week. Where Lauren would dismiss my stories about volunteer work with vague, "That's nice," responses while scrolling her phone, Sophie would ask specific questions about my students, remember details from previous conversations, and share related experiences from her own work. "How's that teenager Marcus doing with his jewelry box project?" She'd ask weeks later, actually remembering names and details from stories I'd told her. When Sophie casually mentioned during one of our coffee talks that she'd recently ended a 3-year relationship because her ex-boyfriend had stopped putting any effort into their connection, I felt a jolt of recognition. He started treating our relationship like something that would just maintain itself, she explained, stirring her latte thoughtfully. Like he could stop trying completely and I'd just accept whatever minimal effort he felt like giving. I realized I deserved someone who was actually excited to be with me. The way she described her situation mirrored my own so perfectly that I almost laughed at the cosmic irony. Here was someone who valued genuine effort and emotional connection, who'd walked away from someone who took her for granted, sitting across from someone who was planning to do exactly the same thing. I began to see Sophie not just as a friend, but as evidence that there were people in the world who approached relationships with the same values I did, who believed that partnerships should involve mutual respect, genuine communication, and real emotional investment from both sides. 2 months after meeting Sophie, our friendship naturally evolved into something deeper, and I discovered what it felt like to be with someone who was genuinely excited about every aspect of our connection. The transition happened gradually, lingering conversations turned into dinner dates, casual touches became more intentional, and the emotional intimacy we'd built through friendship created a foundation for something I'd never experienced with Lauren. "I love how thoughtful you are," Sophie told me during our first real date at a quiet Italian restaurant downtown. "The way you remember what matters to people, how you actually listen when someone talks. It's rare to find someone who cares that much about understanding others." Her words hit me like a revelation because Lauren had always criticized these same qualities, calling my attentiveness overthinking and my memory for details obsessive. With Sophie, every conversation flowed effortlessly, filled with genuine laughter, intellectual stimulation, and emotional depth that made me realize how much I'd been settling for surface-level interaction. When we finally became intimate, the difference was astounding. Sophie approached physical connection with enthusiasm, open communication, and generous attention that created an environment where I discovered confidence and abilities I never knew I possessed. "Tell me what you like," she whispered during one of our early encounters, her voice warm and encouraging rather than clinical or dismissive. "I want to learn what makes you feel good." The contrast with Lauren's approach couldn't have been sharper. Where Lauren treated intimacy like a performance she had to endure, Sophie saw it as a genuine connection to explore and enjoy together. She communicated openly about her preferences, asked about mine, and created a space where both of us could be completely authentic without judgment or pretense. I found myself becoming someone I didn't recognize, confident, passionate, attentive in ways that came naturally when I was with someone who appreciated rather than tolerated my efforts. "You're incredible at this," Sophie murmured against my shoulder one evening, her breath still uneven from our connection. "I can tell you actually care about my experience, about making sure we're both present and enjoying ourselves. That's not as common as it should be." Her words sparked something proud and protective in me, a realization that I'd been wasting years trying to connect with someone who fundamentally didn't want to be reached. Sophie's approach to our entire relationship was built on mutual respect, shared vulnerability, and genuine desire to build something meaningful together. She remembered details about my work, asked thoughtful questions about my goals, and shared her own dreams and fears with a trust that made me want to be worthy of her openness. "I've been thinking about getting my own studio space for private art therapy sessions," she told me one Saturday morning as we had breakfast in bed. "It's scary to think about leaving the security of working at the center, but I have so many ideas for specialized programs." I found myself genuinely invested in her success, helping her research business loans, brainstorming marketing strategies, offering to help with the renovation work if she found the right space. The way she lit up when discussing her ambitions made me remember what it felt like to be excited about the future with someone, to see our individual successes as shared victories rather than competing priorities. During this time, I began documenting our happiness through small gestures that were partly genuine expressions of affection and partly evidence of what a healthy relationship actually looked like. I'd write little notes about our dates, save ticket stubs from movies and concerts we attended together, keep receipts from restaurants where we'd had particularly meaningful conversations. Sophie appreciated these mementos in a way that Lauren never had, often adding her own thoughts and memories to create a shared record of our developing relationship. "Look what I found," Sophie said one evening, pulling a napkin from her purse with her phone number written on it from the night we first exchanged contacts. "I kept it because you drew that little smiley face next to the numbers. Such a small thing, but it made me smile for days." Her appreciation for thoughtful details made me realize how starved I'd been for someone who actually valued the effort I put into caring for them. After 3 months with Sophie, I finally decided it was time to end things with Lauren, but I wanted to make sure she understood exactly what she'd lost through her own indifference and deception. I began strategically leaving subtle evidence of my new relationship around our shared apartment, carefully placing items where Lauren would eventually notice them but not immediately realize their significance. Restaurant receipts from places Sophie and I had gone together found their way onto the kitchen counter. Concert tickets from shows we'd attended were left in my jacket pockets that hung in the hallway closet, and small gifts Sophie had given me appeared on my dresser among my other belongings. The most deliberate piece of evidence was a handwritten thank you note from Sophie, written in her elegant script on cream-colored stationery after a particularly thoughtful surprise date I'd planned for her birthday. "Jason," the note read, "last night was absolutely perfect. The way you remembered that I mentioned loving stargazing during our second conversation, then found that secluded spot outside the city with the telescope you borrowed, it was the most romantic thing anyone has ever done for me. Your attention to detail, your creativity, your passion for making me feel special, I've never experienced anything like it. Thank you for showing me what it feels like to be truly cherished by someone who pays attention to what matters to me. You make me feel like the luckiest woman alive. All my love, Sophie." I placed this note prominently on Lauren's pillow, along with a detailed review of our evening that Sophie had playfully written on the back of the concert program from that same night. 5 stars for an unforgettable evening, she'd written with obvious joy. Incredible attention to detail, genuine caring, and passion that left me breathless. Would definitely recommend to anyone looking for someone who knows how to make a woman feel appreciated and desired. This man is a rare find who actually listens and remembers what matters. The timing was perfect because Lauren was returning from a girls' weekend trip to Vegas, 3 days of partying and complaining about relationships with her equally self-absorbed friends. I knew she'd go straight to the bedroom to dump her suitcase and would immediately see both the note and the review in Sophie's unmistakable handwriting. I made sure to be in the living room when she discovered my deliberate evidence, sitting calmly on the couch with my laptop, working on a woodworking project proposal for the community center as if nothing had changed. The silence from the bedroom stretched for almost 10 minutes before I heard her footsteps in the hallway, slower and more deliberate than usual. "Jason," Lauren called from the doorway, her voice strangely controlled. "Can you come here for a minute?" When I walked into the bedroom, she was holding Sophie's note and review, her face cycling through confusion, realization, and rising anger as the implications became clear. "What is this?" she demanded, waving the papers like evidence in a criminal trial. "Who is Sophie, and why is she writing thank you notes about romantic dates with my boyfriend?" I sat down on the edge of the bed, maintaining the same calm demeanor I'd perfected over the past few months. "Sophie is someone who appreciates the effort I put into making her feel valued," I said simply. "Someone who doesn't fake her responses or treat intimacy like a chore she has to endure." Lauren's face went pale as she connected the dots between my words and her own confession months earlier. "Are you telling me you've been cheating on me?" she asked, though her voice lacked the righteous indignation she was trying to project. "I'm telling you that I found someone who actually wants to be with me," I replied. "Someone who sees my attention to detail as thoughtful rather than obsessive, who appreciates romantic gestures instead of dismissing them, who approaches our relationship with genuine enthusiasm instead of resigned tolerance." She stared at the note again, rereading Sophie's words about feeling cherished and appreciated, probably recognizing qualities in Sophie's writing that she'd never bothered to express herself. "How long has this been going on?" Lauren asked, sinking onto the bed beside me with the defeated posture of someone who just realized the full scope of her own neglect. "Long enough for me to remember what it feels like to be wanted," I said. "Long enough to understand that what we had was never actually a relationship, It was just you settling for someone convenient while I convinced myself that your indifference was normal. Lauren's discovery triggered an explosive confrontation that revealed just how delusional she'd become about our relationship and her role in its deterioration. "You cheated on me," she screamed, jumping up from the bed and pacing around the room like a caged animal. "You betrayed everything we built together. How could you do this to us after 3 years?" The irony of her outrage wasn't lost on me, considering she'd been deceiving me for months if not years, but I maintained my calm composure while she worked herself into a frenzy. "I emotionally checked out of this relationship after you told me you fake it every time," I said evenly. "You made it clear that intimacy and connection weren't important to you, so I found someone who actually values those things." Lauren stopped pacing and whirled to face me, her face red with a mixture of anger and something that looked like panic. "That's completely different. I was being honest about a physical issue, not throwing away our entire relationship for some random woman." The way she tried to minimize her confession as just a physical issue told me everything I needed to know about how little she understood what she'd actually revealed that night. "You told me you'd been faking emotional and physical connection for our entire relationship," I replied. "Then you dismissed my suggestion that we work on it together and said it wasn't important anyway. What exactly did you expect me to do with that information?" She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, probably realizing that any defense of her behavior would require acknowledging how dismissive and cruel she'd been. Instead, she pivoted to demanding details about Sophie, as if knowing more about my new relationship would somehow give her ammunition to fight back. "Who is she? How did you meet her? I want to know everything about this woman who thinks she can steal my boyfriend." The possessive fury in her voice was almost comical considering how little interest she'd shown in being my girlfriend when it actually mattered. "Her name is Sophie, she's an art therapist, and she didn't steal anything," I said. "I chose to be with someone who appreciates me instead of someone who treats me like an inconvenience." Lauren's desperation reached new heights as the reality of losing me began to sink in. "Jason, please, we can work on this," she pleaded, suddenly switching from anger to bargaining. "I know I wasn't perfect, but we have history together. We have 3 years invested in this relationship. You can't just throw that all away for someone you barely know." The word invested struck me as particularly telling. She saw our relationship as a financial transaction rather than an emotional connection, something that would be wasteful to abandon regardless of how miserable it made both of us. "Those 3 years taught me what I don't want in a partner," I said. "Someone who fakes interest, dismisses my efforts, and only recognizes my value when they're about to lose it." She tried tears next, the same manipulative crying she'd used whenever she wanted to avoid taking responsibility for her behavior. "I love you, Jason. I know I'm not good at showing it, but you mean everything to me. Please don't leave me for someone who doesn't know you like I do." The hollow sound of her declaration made it clear that even she didn't believe what she was saying. "Sophie knows me better after 3 months than you did after 3 years, I told her. "She knows what I'm passionate about, what makes me laugh, what my goals are for the future. She asks about my day and actually listens to the answer. When was the last time you did any of those things?" Lauren couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. She'd stopped paying attention to me as a person years ago, if she'd ever really started. When she realized that tears and bargaining weren't working, she shifted to threats and accusations. "I'll call her. I'll tell her what kind of man you really are, how you abandoned someone who loved you for 3 years. She'll see right through your act." I pulled out my phone and showed her that I'd already blocked her number. "Sophie knows exactly what kind of man I am because I've never had to hide anything from her. Feel free to embarrass yourself by trying to contact her, but you should know that she's already heard about you and feels sorry for how badly you mishandled a good thing." The deflation in Lauren's shoulders when she realized I'd been completely transparent with Sophie was visible proof that she'd been operating under the assumption that I was as deceptive as she was. 6 months later, Sophie and I were living together in a cozy downtown apartment that we decorated with pieces from both of our lives, building a relationship based on genuine mutual respect, shared interests, and the kind of emotional and physical compatibility I'd never known was possible. Our place reflected our partnership perfectly, her vibrant artwork on the walls next to shelves I'd built to display both our books, a reading nook by the window where we'd spend Sunday mornings with coffee and crossword puzzles, and a small studio space where she worked on private art therapy sessions while I crafted custom furniture pieces as a side business. Lauren's attempts to win me back had escalated to borderline stalking behavior in the weeks following our breakup, with increasingly desperate text messages sent from different phone numbers, surprise visits to my workplace, and even attempts to befriend Sophie's coworkers to get information about our relationship. She showed up at the community center again yesterday. Sophie told me one evening as we made dinner together, her tone more amused than concerned. Asked Mrs. Henderson from my painting class if I was treating you right, and whether you seemed happy. Poor Mrs. Henderson didn't know what to say. The absurdity of Lauren suddenly caring about my happiness after years of indifference was almost entertaining, but her persistence had forced me to involve security at both the community center and my office. Eventually, her behavior gradually faded when she realized that no amount of drama or manipulation would change the fundamental fact that I'd found something infinitely better and had no intention of looking back. I heard she's been telling people that you abandoned her and betrayed her trust, my friend Mike mentioned during a barbecue at his place. Says she was the victim of emotional abuse and that you manipulated her into thinking everything was her fault. Sophie and I exchanged glances across the patio, both of us recognizing the classic pattern of someone who couldn't accept responsibility for their own role in a relationship's failure. She's rewriting history to make herself the victim, Sophie observed later as we walked home through the tree-lined streets of our neighborhood. It's easier than admitting that she took someone wonderful for granted until it was too late. Her narrative found little sympathy among our mutual friends who had witnessed Lauren's indifference during our relationship, her constant dismissal of my efforts, and her general attitude that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention she decided to throw my way. Most people who knew us weren't surprised that I'd eventually found someone who actually appreciated what I brought to a relationship. Sophie encouraged me to focus on our future rather than Lauren's inability to process the consequences of her own actions, and I found it remarkably easy to follow that advice. Being with someone who was genuinely excited about building a life together made Lauren's desperate attempts to reclaim what she'd lost seem like distant noise from a past that no longer mattered. You know what I love most about us? Sophie asked one evening as we sat on our small balcony watching the sunset over the city skyline. Everything feels like a choice we're both making every day, not something we're just going through the motions with. She was absolutely right. Our relationship required constant effort and communication from both of us, but it felt effortless because we were both invested in making it work. We talked about everything from our daily experiences to our long-term goals, supported each other's ambitions, and approached challenges as a team rather than adversaries. Sophie's art therapy practice had grown to include corporate workshops and private sessions, while my custom furniture business had taken off through word-of-mouth referrals from the community center. We celebrated each other's successes genuinely, knowing that individual achievement strengthened our partnership rather than threatening it. I got a call today from that couple who saw the dining table I made for your studio, I told Sophie over dinner. They want matching chairs and a coffee table. This could be enough work to let me cut back to part-time at the office. Sophie's face lit up with genuine excitement for my potential career transition, asking detailed questions about timeline, pricing, and workspace needs. Her enthusiasm for my dreams was everything Lauren's indifference had never been. Our physical relationship continued to be a source of joy and connection that reminded me daily what I'd been missing during those years of settling for someone who saw intimacy as an obligation. Sophie approached our connection with curiosity, playfulness, and genuine desire that made me feel valued and confident in ways I'd forgotten were possible. "I love how present you are," she whispered one night as we lay tangled together in our shared bed. "How you pay attention to what I like, how you make sure we're both enjoying every moment. It makes everything so much better when both people actually care about the experience." 6 months in, I could honestly say that I'd never been happier or felt more valued in a relationship, and Lauren's confession had inadvertently led me to discover what love was supposed to feel like when both people were genuinely committed to making it work.